before starting off,
はい、光さん。
yes.
はい、今からです。スタートお願いします。
Hi.
Let's start. Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. I'm from Japan. I'm Hikari from Akindo. Before kicking off this workshop, on platform as many of them you know.
OK です。何でもないです。どうぞ。
And this is the platform, our platform, and the FrameHack 2 is also listed here. We currently have over 6,000 developer community, not necessarily limited to Japan, across the globe, and 20% of them are Japanese. Without further ado, let me start off. Okay. So now today's speaker is Chris. Hi, Chris. Chris created the frame train, which is no-code tool to use the frames on Ficaster, and developers can create their own frame templates for anyone to use. Okay, from now, I'm handing it over to Chris.
Hey everyone, thanks Hikari. All right, so can you all hear me? Type something in the chat if you can hear me, and let's get going. So let's start with Ficaster, and before that, let's start with me. So I've been an engineer for more than 15 years now. Joined Web3 in 2016. Built a few products and startups in the space, and currently I'm focused on Ficaster and especially on frames and making frames easy to use and utility frames. So we're focusing on frames that have utility and are more than just novelties that live for a week or like some short period. All right. So let's get into Ficaster. Ficaster is a sufficiently decentralized social network and is the only one of its kind that calls itself sufficiently decentralized. It was created by two guys that previously worked at Coinbase. It's pretty well funded, and the idea is that it has some centralized parts, but the data, all of the data, like who I'm following, what I posted, even who I blocked or who blocked me, is public. So there could never be the case of an API shutting down because there's no API. So something like what happened on Facebook when they closed down all APIs for developers, that could not happen here because all the data is already public. And that's the first part about Ficaster. The second part is about frames. So if you know about frames or built a frame, just type one in the chat so I can see like how many of you have experience with frames in general. Okay. So frames, you can even see in the image here, are small parts of the newsfeed that are interactive. So it's built on the OG frame standard from Facebook, like the Open Graph, for seeing a website preview. When you send a link to someone on Telegram or on Twitter, you see an image preview. Frames are basically just that, the image, with an additional 4 buttons and a field. In general, if you already have experience with them, this workshop might not be that fruitful, because we're gonna talk about like the basics of frames and how you add one to frame train. So how does a frame look? This is a frame. And
Chris, are you sharing a screen or something, or?
And please, yeah, camera on. Okay.
I should be sharing my screen. Can you not see it? Let me try again.
Yeah, somehow we are not seeing the screen now.
Okay. I'm not sure why exactly. It should be working. Just let me try to join again. Yeah, I'll join again in a second.
Okay, everyone, now we have some issue with the PC, and Chris is coming back shortly. Oh yes, he's already coming in again. Hi, Chris, do you hear us? Great.
Yes, I can hear you. Let me try sharing my screen again.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. So can you see my screen still?
Yes, I can see the Zoom screen.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So
now I'm seeing it.
right.
Yeah, Bobcaster screen. Yeah.
So let's continue where we left off, which is how does a frame look? What can you build with it? So this is a frame. It's a pretty basic frame. The goal of it is to show like a slideshow of images. And this is right in Workcast, which is a client for the Firecaster network. And right in the post, I can see this and I can interact with it. Okay, and I can navigate and potentially have an input field too to enter some data. But as I said, this is a pretty basic one. So let's get to one that is a bit more complex and a bit more useful, I guess. So this is a scheduling frame, and you can book a call with me right from this frame. The process is like this. So you first select like the meeting duration. Let me try this one. I didn't set availability in my cal.com. So that's the issue here. But the idea is that you can build more complex, like you can build simple stuff and really complex stuff. What makes frames powerful is that when I'm pressing this button and any button here, what I receive on the server is a signed message with my account. So the server knows who pressed the button. It's not just a not just a public, like how you go to a public website and you're not logged in, so you don't know who is using it. When you use a frame, the server knows who is using the frame. So if we go, for example, to the logs here, and we check what is happening, when I press this button here, I should see something in the logs showing the message, which looks like this. It's right here. So I know who pressed the button, and it's a validated message. So I can decrypt that and validate it on the server. So that's why they're really powerful, because you get this data for free. Basically, you can log in the user for free. You don't need to do any verification. Frames are mostly used on Firecaster and Firecaster clients, such as WordCast, but they also work on other social networks, actually. There's a standard called OpenFrames, and OpenFrames makes frames compatible with Lens and with XMTP. So they are not just tied to the Firecaster network. You can easily post them on Lens, for example, or send them in chats on XMTP, like splitting a payment. You can have that in a frame and send it in a conversation, and everyone pays right from the conversation, but with a frame. OpenFrames is actually one of the issues in this hackathon. So here, by the way, you can see all of the tracks that start with FH2. There's mostly templates and 2 new features. One of them is implementing OpenFrames. And if you're building a new template, there's also a track for that. But let's focus on the OpenFrames one. So you can implement this in FrameTrain and make all the current frames and templates compatible with Lens and XMTP. The best place to learn about frames in general is the frame specification. And if you are familiar with this page, if you opened it in the past, that's really good, because it's pretty much the only thing that you need to know for this hackathon outside of how FrameTrain works and what APIs you have at your disposal to build frames and templates. So this is the most important page that you can go to in order to learn about frames. It's the Firecaster documentation. And right here, you can see what you can do with frames and how you can do it, like how many buttons it can have, what properties, the fact that there could be only 2 aspect ratios. So it can be a square one like this, or a wide one. This ratio is not dynamic, so you can either have it as wide or square. There's no in between or other dimensions. And everything is right here, like what each button can do. Most of the buttons just send a post request, and that's the default action on a button that you build on FrameTrain. So by default, all the buttons in a template just send a post request. You can also have a link button, which sends no post request. It just like opens a new tab with the link, and there's a link icon right here. You can have a mint, which is connected to Zora. So you need to create the NFT on Zora, and this was really used at the start when Frames launched in February. But yeah, it's only it only works with Zora, so I didn't use it that much. And there's also transaction, which is the second most used one. So most of the buttons are either a transaction, a link, or a post. And by default, it's a post. With the transaction type, you can prompt the user to send transactions. So you get the logged in user, you know who pressed the button on Firecaster. You build a transaction for them, which is basically like the smart contract address that you're sending it to, the ABI of the contract, and the data. And the user will see a pop-up right in the client, and they can sign the transaction right there. So again, I'm gonna say that this is the best place to learn like the basics of frames. The other way to learn about frames and what you can build with them is in the FrameTrain SDK right here. This is what you can use when building your template. It makes building templates really easy. And that in turn makes using frames really easy, because we haven't really talked about the goal of FrameTrain and what's the purpose of building these templates. And the fact is that frames are interesting, they're really cool, but you can't post them. Like as a normal user, if you see a frame and it's interesting, like the concept is interesting, and you also want to post frames with anything, you can do that. You must be a developer to do that, or have at least some coding knowledge to use a framework and deploy that on a server or on Vercel. So that means basically that most of the users will not post a frame or will not post an original frame. They will just post other frames because it's not viable to create them. They can't create them. So the idea is to make it as easy as sharing an image on Instagram, for example. You don't need to be to have a photo editing skills or photography skills or anything to just post an image on Instagram. But for frames, you need to be a developer. So that's what we're doing here. We're changing that. We're building templates that other users, simple users like normal users, can then create frames from without typing any code or hosting anything. So all of the templates are used to create new frames, and all of those frames are already hosted on FrameTrain. The user doesn't have to do anything besides simply configuring it. Everything that you can use is right here. There's hooks. I'm gonna go into where you're using them and when it makes sense to use them. But first, it's important to know like where everything is. Okay. The most used ones will be the hooks. You will always use like the use frame config hook because you want to update the configuration of the current frame. When the user makes a change in the UI, you update that in the configuration. So pretty much any template will use this hook. Then you will use the UI components to build a configuration screen where the user does all the setting. Besides that, it's mostly image uploading. So image uploading, UI components, and hooks. That's what you'll be using the most. Now, let's see where all these parts are used. First, to get to this, you need to clone the repository. So you simply clone this repository, and then you'll have something like this, and you'll see all these files. First, you need to add your .env file with all the values. You need a configuration for the database for Torso, which is free. And you also need a key for Cloudflare, for the bucket, to store files, basically. Everything that you need is right here in the How to Get Started section. It's the first page of the wiki. And it also lists all the steps. So you create an account with these two providers, then input all the required data in the .env file, install the dependencies. After the repository starts up and you make sure that there's no errors, you can migrate the database so you have the columns in your Torso database. And then that's it. Then you can start building and adding a template. All of the templates are in this folder, and that's where you will be adding your code to. So don't edit or change anything outside of this folder. We are only working in this folder. And each template has 4 parts. It has an index file, it has handlers, it has views, and it has an inspector. Let's start with handlers first. So when you press a button on a frame, it needs to go somewhere, right? Like the action that I pressed this button needs to go somewhere on frame plane. And this is where it goes to. All the button presses on a certain slide of the frame. So all the button presses in this slide, if I press any of these buttons, it will go to a specific handler that you define. You say where you want the button actions to go to. So when I press this button here, it will go to this handler, to the duration handler. And this will do all the logic. And then show me this screen right here that choose the duration of our call. So when I pressed this button here, it went to this function, which I defined that it should go to this function when building this template. And then the function returns me a new image and a new set of buttons, basically. So each handler returns a new slide in the frame, a new image and set of buttons. It can also return a transaction data. So we'll get into that, but usually they simply return a new set of buttons and the image, which is a React component. Like this gets built on every request, and it's a straightforward React component, no extra libraries, nothing like that. So the screen that you see right here is this screen. So you can see the text, like choose the duration of our call. It's exactly this screen. This got rendered right here. And the buttons come from here, because I'm saying that it should have this button and this component. And if you look right here, I'm specifying the handler, which is basically when any button on this slide is pressed, it will go to the day function. The same that all buttons in the previous slide went to this function. Now, the buttons here, everything will be sent to this function right here. You can access all of the data of the user here and of the message in the body. So you can see here that you can get the address of the user. You can see exactly like who the user is, like the Farcaster ID, the display name. You may need this data either to run some checks or to differentiate from other data in the configuration or the storage, like in the database, because you can also configure the frame, but you can also store data, which is a bit different. Okay, so let's talk about the configuration first and go into the difference between storage and configuration. The configuration is what you receive. You both receive the storage and the configuration field, basically. So if we go to the starter template, which is a dummy template that you can copy when creating your template, so you don't need to write all this. You can just copy this folder and start from there. You can see that we also get this storage. So if I wanted, I could also get the storage object right here. Okay, so you may not need both of them. You always need a config, but sometimes you don't need the storage, and that's why it wasn't here. But it can be useful, for example, for persistent data that you want to store as the developer of the template. So the configuration is only used to configure the frame, like whatever configuration options you offer to the user. So if we go to frame for example, and just open any frame, let's open that exact one with the booking. So this is all the configuration that I can do on this frame. And the template is specifying that I can do all this configuration. This is basically all a component, everything right here. But the idea is that everything here is saved into the configuration. And this is data that doesn't change between requests. So the config only changes when the user is in this editor and they change it and they press publish. That's the only way it could change. But for example, if you have a frame for voting, a poll frame, so you want to let people vote, where do you store the votes? You can't store them in the configuration. That's only reserved for the user's configuration, and it doesn't change between requests. So when someone votes, the configuration doesn't change. So you need some place to store all this data and then to be able to get it back. And that's what the storage is for. It's basically your own part of the database. So each frame has this storage field, which it can use to store any data they want. So I'm gonna go exactly to the poll frame and see right here. And it's using the storage. Okay, and overwriting it. So it's changing the values when someone votes to update it. It does some more logic, okay, and at the end, it returns the new storage, which means it will update the current storage in the database with this new object that you specified. So we have the buttons specified that appear underneath, the aspect ratio, which you can also not put if you want the default aspect ratio. We specify the updated storage, which is not displayed in the frame somewhere. It's just saved in the database. And then the visual part, which is what fonts do we use in this view, like which fonts do we want to load, so this can render properly. And then the component itself with all the data that it needs, like we wrote all this, like we say what data our component needs, and then we pass it, and that's it. So this is why storage is useful. You can store persistent data, basically. That's what you can use it for. It's your own part of the database, because otherwise you basically would have no storage, and the things that you could build with frames would be not that many, basically. Okay, since we're not using storage, I'm gonna just remove this from here. The params argument is just like what you expect, is a simple URL parameters that you get on each request, and you can also set them yourself. So if you return a new set of params, you will get them back in the next function that is called. And that's the purpose of the handlers. The handlers receive the action from a button and do the processing they need and return a new slide. Okay, so we got through the first part of template, which is handlers. Then comes views, which we seen already, like we seen some of the views here. The image part here that you see here is always either a component that gets rendered at request time, so which is dynamically rendered. In this case, it's always dynamically rendered, or it can be an image, a static image. In this case, these are all static images. It's the reason why they also load so fast. So if you see like that your frame is a bit slower, like 1 second, 1 second and a half compared to this, it's the reason, like this is probably the reason. These are all static images, and on this frame, everything is dynamic, so it gets rendered. So this part can either be an image or a component. If it's a component, it sits right in this folder, and you've seen how they are called. They are called in a handler. You simply return the component and pass it any props that it needs right here. You don't need to worry about the rendering or anything. Just return the component and specify the input that it needs. These are basically React components. Like every view here is a React component, so it can do logic inside. It can't have hooks because it just rendered as an image, but it can have logic, like to parse some of the data Usually you would do that in your handler, but you can also do it here if it makes sense, like how we're extracting the paragraphs here and not passing them directly. You can see some more processing here done in the component itself. So if you feel like writing it here, there's no issue, it can do that. Just don't use hooks or anything like that, because there's no client. So it just gets rendered to an image and displayed in this frame. There's no hooks that can run. There's no React running. It's just used as the image. Pretty easy, I would say. Like it's the usual view controller pattern. Basically like model view controller without the model, basically. You also see a utils folder here. This was just added by the template creator. So you can structure your files inside your folder here however you want. They chose to create a utils folder. You can name it common, hooks, whatever you need. Okay, so no requirements on that. Then comes the inspector, which is probably the place where you'll spend the most time on. Each template has an inspector, okay, as they also have views and handlers and the index file. They all have an inspector because this is how the user configures the frame. Okay, so this part right here is the inspector. This is not part of the frame train repository. This is this component right here. So if we look right here, it has the first section is username, which is this one right here. It has all these sections that are specified right here. Everything is wrapped inside configuration.root, and then we specify a dot section component for each section here in the inspector. These are pre-made components in the SDK, so you just import them. As you can see, everything here is using the SDK and the SDK folder. So never import something outside of the SDK folder if it's in the project. So all these are libraries. This is for icons. This is for like the error message. These are not files in the repository. So you can import packages. You can import your own files. But besides that, only use functions and components from the SDK folder. So if you see you have imported it from somewhere else, because that might happen, just remove that import and try to find that function again, or see if you should be able to import that, because maybe you're trying to import something that isn't available. But you can check all of this right here. So all the components are right here. All right, so this is the inspector, and just for example, I'm going to open another one so you see that it's different. If we go to this one, it has a different configuration screen. It wants a Medium article link, and then it transforms that into a frame. Yeah. So that's the purpose of the inspector. It lets the user actually configure your template, because otherwise it's a static thing. You can't create dynamic frames out of it. It's just one version. Like it wouldn't be different from a basic frame. But we're building templates which are customizable by users, and we achieve that by allowing these options in the inspector. So that's the purpose. In the index file is basically all the metadata of your template and some more stuff. So the name, the description, the short description, you are going to see right here in the starter template that it tells you what it means. So the short description appears as the composer action description. If you're not that familiar with composer actions, it's this right here. So this is the short description. You can see that this is actually the medium one that we saw like right before. And this is the short description. So if we go to the medium template and look right here, article to frame, and it needs to be like under 20 characters. Your FID from Farcaster, so you need to have a Farcaster account, but you should already have that by now. You can't test your frames otherwise. Okay, the cover image and icon. You don't have to worry about this so much. Just put an icon and a cover. You can also leave the default one, but if you have a cover, that's obviously much better for your submission, and it shows like that you built an entire idea from start to finish, because you don't have to create the icon or cover. I'm not saying that. You can, like, this is the cal.com icon, and the same for the cover. So, just put something there, something simple. Then we specify our inspector component, the handlers, right here. So the inspector is imported, the cover and icon images, and our handlers. We don't need to import the views because the views are imported in the handlers, and that's where everything happens. Okay, if you ever run into an issue, you can post directly right here in the FrameTrain channel, or just message me directly, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible and help you with anything. So yeah, if you get stuck, just message me. I think if you zoom out a bit, it makes sense. So you need to have components for the images at the top. You need to have some functions that control those views and give data to them so it can show the relevant data. And you need to have a component so the user can configure their frame. That's basically it. But all these parts are integrated into FrameTrain into one single place, which also lets you do much more, like upload files, gate, some slides. Basically, everything that you would have done when creating a one-off frame, a frame that's not meant to be reusable, like for yourself. You have access to everything that you would use when doing that. You have access to it as an API on FrameTrain. So that's that's how everything works. That's how a template works, and that's how it should be built. You're gonna see like all the other small details when building one. It doesn't make sense to just talk about everything because you will learn some of this by yourself, and if not, just let me know and I'll be glad to help out. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chris. Before going into the Q&A, can I ask about so what sort of criteria you have for the hackathon?
All right. That's an important part. So you can see everything right here. It's also on GitHub, but it's also right here. So given the fact that there is already a set of issues, of tracks, of ideas to build that you can already choose from, that's not much of a problem. So you can just pick any of the ideas here, or if you come up with a new idea, that is also good. There's an issue specifically open for it. So you already have a set of utility-focused ideas, and as I said in the beginning, that's what we're looking for utility. So your template needs to have some sort of utility, basically. That's a pretty like, it's not that high of a bar, like, to be honest. You just need to find something that people would actually need. Like, don't think about what they would like to use specifically, but what they would need to use. So you can take a look at the current template. So it lets you, this one lets you book calls. You can turn your entire blog into a frame. And this one is actually really easy, so don't think it's something complex. This just takes the RSS feed of any blog and turns it into a frame. That's it, but it brings some utility. So that's the only big criteria, basically, having utility.
Thank you so.
I could add a bit about what you can do to not win. Like, what would be the counter steps, basically, like what you should not do. And you should not start building your template like alone, so to speak, and then upload it in the last moment. We don't have time to look at it before, and you don't have time to make any edits. So it's better if you just publish it like as soon as possible while you're still working on it. So you can also ask questions about it, and like, I have something to look at and can give you some advice or some feedback. Yeah, and it's also clear that you like, if it's a new idea, it's clear that you had that idea because you're the one that first published the work in progress version. So, like, there's no benefit of just working in quiet and then submitting it in the last day, and that's it. It's probably not going to be a good result, either from the structure or like the usefulness. Yeah, so it's best to share it like as soon as possible. Share that you're working on it, make it public, and let me know about it. Like, post on the channel, send me a message. That's the idea. So the way to not win this is to, like, try to build something like just by yourself and submitting in the last moment without engaging in any way, like yeah, like not getting any feedback.
Chris, there are some questions coming in. First question is
Yeah.
it possible to integrate other tooling like Airstack?
Right. So whenever you want to add a new package or a new API, the first place you should look at is the package.json and see what is already here. In this case, AirStack is not as a package here, but it's already integrated into the repository. So you can do calls to AirStack and GraphQL requests. There's nothing installed for GraphQL specifically, but we use the AirStack data, so you can use that too. Basically, like it's already integrated. It's right for this feature here, so you can earn Moxie with your AirStack key, and the user inputs their key here. But if they don't input it, we have our own key in the backend. So we are already using AirStack. So yes, the short answer is yes. Yeah. And if you want to install an npm package, see if it's not already here or if there's not a similar version that does the same thing. Yeah.
And
What's the
also,
next question?
yeah, can we come up with our own ideas or must we refer to the issues page?
There's an issue for a new idea. So
Right.
that's one of the tracks. There are all these tracks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 tracks for templates, 2 tracks for features, and 1 more track for new ideas, for new template ideas.
I see. Right. Thank you so much. Is there any other question? And also we can ask Chris if it's in Japanese. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and
yeah.
Yeah.
There's one question coming
there
in. Yeah.
Okay.
So which library should we use for hackathon, like Frames, JS, or on-chain kit or Frog?
Okay. So you don't need any of them if you're like just start creating a template, and you're gonna see that there's no place to add Frog or Frames.js. That's all happening under the hood. So like your views are right here, your functions are right here, and the view that you return right here as the component gets rendered. You don't have to import Frog or Frames.js or on-chain kit, because you're gonna see that there's no step at which it makes sense to import it. By the time you're finished, you already built the template and it works. So yeah, there's no Frog or Frames.js. That's the purpose of the SDK and what FrameTrain does under the hood. You don't have to use any other solution. Basically, you just structure them into functions and views. That's it, like basic React and server APIs.
Okay. And the next one is, what's the main difference between views and inspector?
Okay. Inspector is a static component, so to say. So I mean, it always has that name. It's always called the inspector, and each template has the inspector component because that component is used right here. It's basically rendered right here. This whole section on the right is the inspector, and you need to have an inspector in your template to render this configuration screen. It is quite different from views. They're both using React, of course. I mean, it's really easy to use. So that also ties in with the question about frog and all of that. Like you can just use basic React right here, like directly, no other layer. The difference between inspector and views is that the views are for the frames themselves. So all the components right here are displayed as the image of the frame, are rendered as and displayed as the image. The inspector is the thing here. The views are all these images that are written in React and rendered then as images. Okay, so you can see the text that is here, it gets rendered as an image. Yeah, so that's the difference. The views are for frames, the inspector is only one, it's always called inspector, and it's right here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. If there is no other question, we will be closing this session. Is there any other question coming in? Okay, there is no question, it seems.
Okay, and
So yeah.
by the way, like if you have no, like, you don't have to ask anything now. Just remember that if you ever have a question, like this is where you should go to. You should post it right here on the channel. If you don't want to post it on the channel, you can just send me a message, and that's it.
Okay, great. So lastly, once again from here. So if you go to our platform, you can easily find the currently like ongoing hackathons here, and you can check the details furthermore again from the page and submit from here. So yeah, I think that's all. Okay. Yeah. So if you have any
Okay.
question, yeah. Chris, you were saying.
No, I was just wrapping up basically.
So
Thank you
if
guys
yeah.
for having me, and hope that everyone will have fun building templates.
Yes, thank you so much for the workshop, Chris. I hope everyone will be continuing the path to the hackathon. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris.